My name is Gabriella. I'm 36 years old, a surgeon living in Denver. I used to believe that if I gave enough, my family would eventually appreciate it. But when I opened the envelope from the lawyer right after the funeral of the grandmother I loved most, I discovered this. The entire estate, including the ancestral home I spent over $80,000 saving, was left to my cousin Emily. My name? Not a single line. Not a word of thanks. Not a single share. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family, the very people you sacrificed your youth to protect? If you've ever felt erased from the story of your own life, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe fairness should never be something we have to beg for. And don't forget to subscribe, because the story I'm about to share will keep you riveted. I still remember the winter I was 29 when a brutal snowstorm hit Timber Falls. Grandma's roof was torn halfway off by the wind, and freezing water poured into her bedroom through the old cracks. At the time, I was on night shift at Denver Mercy Hospital, utterly exhausted after an 8-hour surgery. But the moment I got her call, I hailed a car and drove nearly 4 hours through the snow to get home. I climbed up onto the roof with the repair crew, in temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. My hands went numb, the wet gloves clinging to my skin. I remember trying to keep my balance as I yelled down, "Stay in the kitchen, Grandma. I've got this." She just responded with a faint cough and a nod from the window. At that time, Emily was serving time for driving under the influence and injuring a pregnant woman. She spent 3 years in prison, and even though I never once condemned her, I could never understand why someone who had done something like that was still constantly sheltered by my mother's side of the family. I used to think it was because they saw her as fragile, easy to hurt. But gradually I realized, the stronger I became, the more they treated me like I didn't need love. For nearly 10 years I worked 2 jobs. Days at the hospital, nights at a private clinic. My salary wasn't higher than anyone else's, but like clockwork, I sent home nearly $800 each month to help Grandma pay property taxes. I quietly covered the utility bills whenever my mother went over budget. I didn't want Grandma worrying about anything in her old age. But what did I get in return? I remember visiting once with a brand new humidifier I'd bought for Grandma, since she often woke up with a dry throat. I happily installed it in her room and even wrote up a large font instruction sheet to tape by her bed. My mother walked in, glanced at it, and muttered, "You don't need to show off. You're only staying a few days, don't make a big fuss." Grandma heard her, looked quietly down at her hands. I swallowed my frustration, smiled, and said, "I just want her to sleep a little better." That fall, when Grandma needed hip replacement surgery, I took nearly 6 weeks of unpaid leave to move in and care for her. Every day I helped her out to the porch for some sun, made oatmeal porridge, changed her bandages, massaged her legs. Every night after she slept, I wrote medical updates to send to her primary doctor. Yet during the family meeting about transferring the house, my mother said straight to my uncle, "That Gabriella girl, she takes care of Mom out of duty, not real affection. She's always been cold since she was a kid." I heard everything through the door. I sat behind that thin wall, my hand clenched so tightly it went numb. In moments like that, I wanted to ask her, "So all those hours I spent caring for Grandma, do they mean nothing if they don't come wrapped in the smiles you wanted?" That same year, Emily was released from prison. Her hair was styled in soft curls, her nails painted bright red. Grandma hugged her tight and whispered, "You've gotten so skinny." I was standing right there holding a box of homemade oat cookies I'd baked for Grandma, but at that moment she didn't even look back at me. I wasn't angry at Grandma. I knew she loved Emily, probably because she reminded her of my mother in her younger days. Reckless, dreamy, always stumbling. And me, Gabriella, the girl who had always been by the book, independent, never cried loudly, never called for anyone in the middle of the night. But does that mean the love I gave was any less? One time, on Grandma's 80th birthday, I ordered a cake, invited her closest friends over, strung up banners myself, even hired a jazz band to play her favorite songs. It was a warm, joyful party. Everyone said so. But after they left, my mother sneered, "Stop pretending to be the perfect daughter. Your sister doesn't need parties to be loved." I gave a faint laugh then. But that night I lay next to Grandma just like I used to when I was little, and she whispered, "Thank you. I can't say much, but I see it all." I thought that was enough. Just knowing she understood me. I never asked my family for a single dime. The apartment I live in, I bought it after 12 years of nonstop work. The car I drive, I paid for it with savings from my intern days. Even the meals I cook each night are made with ingredients I pick out myself at the budget grocery store. I'm not wealthy, but I'm stable. And I always believed if I could help make life easier for my loved ones, then why not? But the more I helped, the more they acted like it was owed. I remember one night Grandma had a high fever. Emily was staying with her at the time, but instead of calling a doctor, she called me. Sis, I don't know what to do. Grandma's shaking all over. I drove through the rain and got there around 2 a.m. I helped Grandma into a warm bath, checked her vitals. Emily stood by the door on the phone with her boyfriend. The next day, my mother called, not to thank me, but to scold me. Why did you wait until she was that bad before taking her to the hospital? I didn't respond. I just remember standing at the sink, water running steadily, and feeling so hollow inside I wanted to disappear. At that time, I had just paid nearly $9,000 in overdue property taxes to save the house. The bank notices were arriving weekly, and if I hadn't sent the money, they would have begun foreclosure proceedings. My mother couldn't cover it. Emily was off in California for mental health therapy. And me, the only one who knew how to keep things from falling apart, was being told I didn't know how to share. I still remember last spring. I offered to sign up for comprehensive insurance for the house. Grandma smiled and agreed. But my mother objected. Too expensive. And what if Emily ends up on the title? We'll have to redo everything. I froze. The words slipped out of her mouth so naturally, like it had already been decided long ago. I looked at Grandma. She just stayed silent. I didn't blame her, but a small crack started forming inside me. And today, as I held the will in my hands and saw Emily's name printed boldly under Sole Heir, I didn't feel the pain I thought I would. I just felt empty. Because deep down I had known all along. I just pretended not to because I was afraid that truth would destroy the last hope I had in my family. I sat on the sofa in the living room where I used to run around as a child, staring at the old photo frames on the wall, my heart tightening. I didn't need the house. What I needed was acknowledgement. And now, with the truth spelled out in black and white, all I had left was one question. Were all my sacrifices ever considered love? I went to the old house that Saturday afternoon. The sky was gray, the wind sharp, but not enough to blow away the tightness in my chest. That house, the one I re-roofed, where I repainted every wooden door with money from my night shifts, was now lit up like a holiday mansion. Cars filled the driveway, jazz music played from the backyard. A white banner with gold letters stretched across the fence. Congratulations to the new owner of 218 Timber Lane, Emily. I walked in and no one even looked up to greet me. The guests, mostly my mother's friends and old colleagues, were laughing, clinking glasses, nodding at Emily as if she had just won a major award. She wore a deep green silk dress, low-cut, her hair in a dramatic updo that never fit the rustic feel of this house. Gabriella. Emily squealed louder than necessary. I didn't think you'd show up. She smiled brightly, then turned to the group. Everyone, this is my cousin, the famous surgeon from Denver. She's done a lot, though she can be a bit serious. I said nothing. I just looked around the familiar room. The long wooden table where Grandma used to mend clothes was now covered with champagne and mini pastries. The chair she always used to read in had been pushed into a corner, replaced by Bluetooth speakers blasting ambient jazz. Everything in the house was still there, except the warmth. You threw a party? I asked, voice low. Emily raised her glass and gave a little shrug. Not really a celebration. I just wanted to share the joy. Grandma left everything to me. I think she understood I needed it more. I gripped the strap of my bag. What about all the years I sent money, fixed the roof, paid the taxes, cared for her after surgery? Emily looked at me, tilting her head slightly like she was trying to sound profound. You did all that out of duty. You've always acted like you're the only one who can handle things. But Grandma didn't need you to sacrifice like that. She just needed love. And I gave her that. I made her laugh. I stared straight into Emily's eyes, feeling my blood rise even as I stood completely still. She laughed. Sure, because you told silly stories. You gave her ice cream while she had diabetes. You gave her scented candles she was allergic to. But every time she needed someone to drive her to the doctor, someone to stay up all night adjusting her pillows, someone to clean the bathroom when she couldn't, that was me. Emily shrugged. You chose to do all that. Grandma didn't force you. And she didn't owe you anything. I froze for a moment. That sentence, "She didn't owe you anything," echoed in my head like a slammed door. She said it lightly like it weighed nothing, but it struck the deepest part of me. I never wanted Grandma to owe me anything. I just always believed, if anyone truly understood me, it would be her. "You've always lived like consequences are someone else's problem," I replied quietly but firmly. "Even after you caused that accident, even when you disappeared for 3 months without a word. And now you think your name in a will proves you were loved." Emily let out a dry laugh. "You're just jealous." I shook my head. "No. I'm sad for Grandma. Because in the end, she had to close her eyes surrounded by a family that only knew how to calculate." I turned away without waiting for a response. But before I could reach the door, I caught the gaze of attorney Blake Mason. He was seated in the corner of the room, wine glass still full, his expression thoughtful. He stood up, walked over to me, and spoke softly, just loud enough for the two of us. "Gabriella, I need to speak with you. Privately." I frowned. "What is it, Mr. Blake?" He quietly pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, folded into thirds, yellowed like it had just been taken from an old notebook. He didn't hand it to me directly. Instead, he slipped it gently into my purse and said only, "Not here. Read it at home. And don't let anyone know it came from me." Before I could ask anything else, he had already turned away, melting into the crowd as if nothing had happened. I left that house with my heart pounding and a heaviness pressing against my chest. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for in that piece of paper. A confession? An apology? Or maybe the final missing piece of a picture I'd been trying to see clearly for 10 years but could never quite make out. Back at my small apartment in downtown Denver, I didn't turn on the lights. I let the dim hallway glow filter through the blinds. I sat down, opened my purse, and carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, heartbreakingly familiar. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the strength to say what I needed to. There were things they pressured me to do, to sign, to believe. But I never forgot who was always there, who carried everything in silence. "Gabrielle, I'm sorry. And I hope one day you'll understand. People can rewrite a will, but they can't rewrite the truth." I bent forward, resting my head against the table, still clutching that trembling piece of paper. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time in all this, I finally heard what I'd been waiting to hear. The final word, from the one person I once loved most. And I knew this wasn't over. It couldn't end like this. Not when the truth had been buried under fake smiles and a cold sheet of legal paper. I slipped the letter into an envelope, careful as if I were holding the last fragment of her soul. I sat in the darkness for a long time, feeling both the ache of grief and a flicker of something deeper than anger. I used to believe justice belonged in a courtroom. But now I understood. Sometimes justice begins with a handwritten note, and someone brave enough to stand up. Not to reclaim property but to restore what was quietly stolen. I sat motionless on the leather chair in my small living room for nearly an hour, still holding the letter from Grandma, as if letting it go would cause all the truth I'd just uncovered to vanish. Her words burned into my mind, "I don't have control anymore." That sentence sent a chill down my spine, not from fear but because I could feel the helplessness in the voice that once shielded me through all my earliest years. I looked at the clock. Nearly 8 in the morning. Attorney Blake Mason's office opened at 8:30. I stood up, put on my coat, tucked the letter into my bag, and stepped out like someone walking into a battle they could not afford to lose. Not for pride, but for memory. Denver's morning streets were quiet. A thin layer of mist clung to windshields, and the pale sunlight filtered through gray clouds. I drove in silence, my mind flashing with memories. Grandma's frail face after surgery, the nights I washed her hair with warm water, the time she held my hand and whispered, "You are my safe place," and the letter she left behind, written with what little courage she had left. I arrived at Blake Mason's office at exactly 8:37. Still the same red brick building on 6th Street, the one I'd visited years ago with Grandma to set up her insurance paperwork. As I walked in, I caught the smell of old paper and morning coffee, the low hum of a printer whirring from the corner. Blake Mason was hunched over some paperwork at his desk, looking more tired than usual. He looked up as I entered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Gabriella, didn't expect you this early," he said a bit awkwardly. "I thought maybe you'd call back last night." I pulled out the chair across from him, opened my bag, and placed the letter gently on the table. You know why I'm here. Tell me everything. Every detail. Blake was quiet for a moment. He picked up the letter, reread it, then sighed, removed his glasses, and rubbed his forehead. Are you sure you want the truth? He asked, his voice low. I'm not sitting here to be told to let it go. He gave a slight nod, leaned back in his chair, eyes staring into the distance like he was weighing his words. The current will isn't the original. The first draft your grandmother, Eleanor, had me prepare left everything to you. No splits. No second thoughts. I still remember her saying, Gabriella's always been the only one who shows up when I have no one else. I swallowed hard. My throat tightened. But then something happened, about 8 months ago, Blake continued. After a major argument in the family that I wasn't part of, she canceled the signing appointment and didn't return my calls for 2 weeks. I didn't know anything about that, I whispered. Because they didn't tell you, Blake said, meeting my eyes. From what I've heard from her former secretary, her part-time caregiver Marissa, and a neighbor, your grandmother was pressured into changing the will. Your mother, Lorraine, and Andrew visited her repeatedly. One time, Andrew even raised his voice out in the yard. Not long after that, she signed the new version. I clasped my hands together, my nails digging into my palms. Pressured, how? Blake watched me for a moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file folder. I can't give you copies, but you're welcome to read it here. I took it and flipped through the pages. The language was dry, formal, legal, devoid of feeling. But when I reached the appendix that listed the reasoning behind the asset distribution, one short paragraph hit me like a punch to the chest. The designated recipient, Emily Baker, is the closest individual emotionally, with the most time spent in care and understanding of my spiritual needs. I looked up at Blake. You know that isn't true. He nodded. I know. But I wasn't the certifying attorney for the new version. They switched to another lawyer, Kyle Harwood, an old college acquaintance of your mother's. That name sounded familiar. I remembered hearing about him once. He'd been accused of unethical conduct handling a trust case in Arizona. The case was buried because no one pursued legal action. Do you know why Grandma agreed to sign it? I asked, my voice barely above a breath. Blake shook his head. I only know part of it. Marissa once told me Eleanor became deeply distressed. The day after a major blowout at the house, she almost collapsed. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. Then one night she called me, around 10 p.m., and said only one thing: they won't leave me alone. I bowed my head. The picture was becoming clearer, each piece falling into place. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked. I was legally bound. I couldn't disclose anything unless there was a formal claim from an heir or evidence of coercion, Blake replied, sounding regretful. Until you brought that letter. I had no grounds. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled deeply. My whole body felt drained of strength. What were they thinking? I murmured. That I'd stay silent forever? That I'd never find out. Blake said nothing. He quietly slid a business card toward me. I can't openly take your side. But if you decide to pursue this, call her Sarah Whitmore. She's an attorney who specializes in contested wills involving psychological coercion. She's one of the good ones. I nodded, slipped the card into my bag, and stood up. Gabriella, Blake called as I turned to leave. I paused. Your grandmother. She loved you very much. Don't let what happened erase that. I gave a faint nod and walked out of the office. The sun was higher now, casting pale golden light onto the sidewalk, but inside me was a rising undertow. What I'd just learned didn't make me angry. No, that emotion had faded long ago. What I felt now was something clearer than ever. I was no longer the same daughter they thought they knew. I had stepped into a space where every promise, every bond of blood, had to be examined in the light of truth. And if they ever believed I'd stay quiet like I had for the last 10 years, then they were wrong. I returned to my small apartment in Denver in the late afternoon, carrying a business card and a growing suspicion. I made a cup of mint tea and sat by the window, the sunset slicing the room in half through the blinds. I couldn't stop thinking about what Attorney Blake had said. They wouldn't leave me alone. If my grandmother had truly been coerced, if something had happened that led her to change her will, then that stairwell fall couldn't have been just an accident. I opened my laptop and logged into the remote security system I had once set up for my grandmother. At first, she'd refused, said it felt like an invasion of privacy, but after she fainted alone in the kitchen one evening, she let me install a simple system. One camera on the front porch, one in the ground floor hallway, one by the stairs. I knew the cloud system only retained data for 90 days unless backed up, but I still held on to hope. I navigated to the old recordings. As I suspected, most of the clips had been auto-deleted. However, thanks to my usual caution, I found a backup I'd downloaded after a storm in February, just about a week before her fall. I wasn't expecting much, but I started going through each segment. A few clips showed her trimming the garden, Emily coming and going, my mother dropping off groceries. Nothing unusual, until I reached the footage dated February 17th at 6:17 p.m. I saw my grandmother standing at the bottom of the staircase holding a stack of papers, possibly documents or letters. Emily was at the top, leaning against the railing while my mother stood behind her, almost out of view. There was no sound, but the gestures were clear. My grandmother raised the papers and tapped them against her chest as if making a firm point. Emily shook her head, arms crossed. My mother stepped forward, saying something with what looked like frustration. My grandmother lifted her chin, seeming resolute. Then it happened. Emily snatched the papers. My grandmother reached out, her step faltered, and she lost her balance. Her knee hit the lower step, her hands didn't catch in time. Her body crumpled downward. My mother stepped forward, not to catch her but to stop Emily. The two of them stood there for nearly 15 seconds before Emily crouched and pulled out her phone. The video cut off there. My hands trembled. Cold sweat rolled down my spine. I replayed that moment at least 10 times. No one pushed her outright. No clear act of violence. But the way Emily yanked the papers, the way my mother didn't react, then delayed calling for help. It felt like a long scratch across a mirror I had tried so hard to keep clean in my mind. I grabbed my phone and called the only person who might have more insight. Marissa, the part-time nurse who had cared for my grandmother for nearly 2 years. I found her number in my old contacts, praying she hadn't changed it. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? Who is this? Marissa, it's me, Gabriella. A brief pause. Oh, hi, doctor. I didn't think you still had my number. Thank you for keeping it active, I said. I need to ask you something about my grandmother. About the day she fell. Silence, then a whisper. I never believed it was just an accident. My heart seemed to stop for a second. Can you tell me more? I don't have proof. But that day I was supposed to come early to take her to a routine checkup. When I arrived, the back door was unlocked, which was very strange. I heard arguing inside. Your grandmother's voice was firm, angry, saying something like, "That girl's already carried enough. Don't take more from her." I assumed she was talking about you. I gripped the phone tighter. And then, when I stepped inside, I saw her at the bottom of the stairs. Emily and Lorraine were standing a few steps away, pale but not panicked. I called 911. They kept arguing about who should call first. She was taken to the hospital and later, she removed me from her care schedule without giving a reason. Did you ever tell anyone about that? I asked. I thought about telling her attorney, but your mother called my workplace the very next day. 3 weeks later, I was fired. Reason given was ethical misconduct. I closed my eyes. My hand was shaking. Everything was becoming clear. No longer a suspicion. It was a web of lies deliberately constructed. Marissa, do you remember what time you arrived that day? Around 5:50. I even took a picture of my car's dashboard clock to prove I was on time. It's an old habit. Do you still have that photo? Yes. I back up everything to a private hard drive. I can send it to you. Please, I said, voice cracking. I don't want to use it to sue or hurt anyone. But I need to know, need to prove that I'm not imagining this. Marissa sighed. I'll send it tonight. And Gabriella, I'm sorry. You deserved to know the truth much earlier. I thanked her, hung up, then opened the voicemail inbox on my grandmother's old phone, which I had kept like a keepsake. I'd never checked the messages. Maybe I'd been afraid. But now I refused to look away. I turned on the speaker and scanned through the folders. Most were missed calls, bank messages, but then I found a voicemail saved on February 14th, 3 days before the fall. Gabriella, it's Grandma. I just had a fight with your mother and Emily. They want me to change the will, say you don't need anything. I refused. But I'm scared, really scared. Something happens. I want you to know. I never meant to leave you. I covered my mouth, the grief I had bottled up exploding inside my chest. Her voice trembled, frail, but every word was filled with resolve. My grandmother wasn't weak. She knew what was right. But she had been pressured, isolated. And in the end, erased from the final decision of her own life. I sat in the dark, my hands still resting on the phone speaker. What I felt wasn't just anger or pain. It was the clarity of someone who had walked far enough to understand that truth, even if it tears your heart open, still deserves to be brought into the light. And I was ready to do that. Not to reclaim the house, but to reclaim the voice of someone who had been forced into silence. I returned to Timber Falls on a March morning. The snow had just melted. The wind was still cold, but the sun had begun to shine again on the town's long-faded rooftops. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare excuses or rehearse fake expressions. The old house on Maple Street where I grew up appeared before me, its paint peeling from the windowsills. I climbed the porch steps. The pale blue wooden door, weathered with time, still bore the scratch I'd left when I was learning to drive at 16. I knocked 3 times. No answer. I was about to turn away when the door creaked open. My mother, Lorraine, stood there in a beige wool robe, a dish towel in her hand. Her eyes were puffy, likely from a sleepless night. When she saw me, she hesitated, then tilted her head, avoiding my gaze. "You came," she said hoarsely. "Come in, it's still cold." I stepped inside, my footsteps heavier than ever. The hallway leading to the kitchen still smelled faintly of old wood and the lavender she always used to freshen the air. But it didn't feel warm. It felt empty. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The dark wood had lost its shine, and in the center was a burn mark from the time Emily had carelessly set down a pot of boiling water. I rested my arms on the table, staring at the woman who had once taught me to read, tie my hair, bake cookies. "You know why I'm here," I began. She didn't answer right away. She got up, poured hot water into 2 cups, then pushed one toward me. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't touch the cup. I waited. "I never wanted things to end up like this," she said softly, still not meeting my eyes. "Everything. I just thought it made sense." "Made sense for who?" I asked. "For you? For Emily? Or for a will that your own mother never wanted to sign?" She paused. Then after a moment she looked up at me, tired. "You've always been strong, Gabriella. Even as a child. I never had to worry about you. You taught yourself, got into college, earned scholarships, moved out. I thought, you didn't need anything. Just space to live your own life." "Didn't need anything, or you never gave me the chance to?" asked my voice thick. "Do you remember when I was 11? When Dad lost his job and I asked if I could deliver newspapers? You said no. Kids shouldn't worry about grown-up stuff. But when Emily skipped school, you said she's still figuring herself out." She bit her lip. I went on. "When I got into med school out of state at 18, do you remember what you said? You said, Emily will be sad without her big sister. You never asked if I was happy or scared. You only worried about Emily." "I didn't hate you," she said quickly, like the words could smother whatever fire was rising in me. "I was grateful. But you don't understand. Being a mother means sometimes choosing who needs you most." I tilted my head back briefly, then looked at her again. "And what about Grandma, Mom? Did she not need anyone?" "She needed me. And when I carried that weight for her, what did you do? You erased me from her will." She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't erase you. I just suggested to her that Emily needed a foundation. You already had everything. You're a doctor. You live in the city, you have a home, your own life. Emily killed someone in a car accident. Emily blew her tuition money on a vacation. Emily can't keep a job for more than 3 months. But Emily is the one who deserves compassion. And I'm the one who should just manage alone." My voice cracked at the end and I felt tears threatening. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. "Do you know what I gave up every time I sent money to cover the property taxes? I canceled vacations. I delayed my residency plans. I postponed my engagement because Grandma was hospitalized. You weren't there. Emily wasn't there. Just me and her. Did you ever ask what that cost me? She lowered her head. A tear fell onto her hand and disappeared into the fabric of her towel. You're a good daughter, she whispered. I know that. I let out a dry laugh. Just because I was silent doesn't mean I wasn't hurting. Just because I did a lot doesn't mean I didn't feel anything. You confused strength with expendability. And now you ask why I pulled away. She reached out as if to take my hand. But I pulled mine back. I'm not here for an apology. I don't need you to fix the will. I just want you to look me in the eye and admit one thing. You were wrong. She began to cry, not loudly, but her shoulders shook. She shook her head, then slowly nodded. Yes. I was wrong, she said under her breath. I let love become distorted. I thought, loving Emily was my duty, and with you I just believed you'd always survive. I nodded slowly. But here's the thing. There were times I couldn't survive alone. And what hurt most wasn't being cut from a will. It was that you never once asked me what I needed. She covered her face, hands trembling. I stood up. The cup of tea remained untouched, now cold. I'm not going to get revenge. I won't try to drag Emily down. But don't expect me to keep holding up everyone else while no one notices how worn down I've become. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving my mother sitting alone in the kitchen where I'd once learned to make carrot soup, where I used to hum, "You Are My Sunshine" to Grandma on rainy days. I didn't look back. But I heard her voice behind me, soft as wind. Gabriella. I truly am sorry. I stepped onto the porch. The pale sunlight hit my eyes. The March breeze was cold but no longer made me shiver. I didn't know how everything would change after today. But one thing was certain, I had spoken. And my mother had to listen. I didn't head back to Denver right away after that conversation. I needed to stay in Timber Falls. Not just because I was emotionally shaken, but because I knew that if I wanted to fight for the truth, for Grandma, for myself, I couldn't quit halfway. The next morning, I sat in a small cafe on the corner, the one Grandma used to take me to on weekends. The smell of fresh waffles filled the space, and soft country music played from an old radio behind the counter. I sipped my cooling cappuccino, eyes fixed on my laptop screen. In my inbox was a new name. Sarah Whitmore, an attorney who specialized in contested wills, the one Blake Mason had recommended. I read through her profile and felt something trustworthy in her. No flashy accolades, no overselling. Just a simple, clear line. I believe justice isn't found in documents, but in the hands of those brave enough to face the truth. I took a deep breath and clicked send to request a meeting. Less than 2 hours later, Sarah called back. Her voice was calm and clear, no fluff. After hearing a quick rundown of the situation, she asked just one question. Gabriella, are you ready to dig into things that won't be easy to hear? I'm ready, I said. I don't need the house. I need the truth restored. Our first meeting took place at her office in Eugene, about an hour's drive from Timber Falls. I brought everything I had. The stairwell security footage, Grandma's voicemail, a copy of the original will that Blake had kept, her handwritten letter, and the recording of my conversation with my mother. Sarah sat across from me in a well-lit room, her desk neatly arranged. After reviewing all the materials, she nodded. We have reasonable grounds to file a will contest, citing undue influence and fraud in the amendment process. I asked, what do I need to prepare for? You need to prepare for pushback, she said. Emily doesn't seem like the type to sit still. People like her, who've been coddled their whole lives, tend to lash out when their privilege is questioned. But if you stay steady, I'll stand with you. I nodded. They thought I'd stay silent forever. But I've stayed silent long enough. 3 days later, the petition to contest the will was filed with the county court. Sarah carefully attached all the evidence, including the letter and the video. We chose not to go public with it. But I forgot one thing. Emily was never the type to wait for a judge's decision. Just 2 days after the court confirmed receipt of the case file, a video clip appeared on Emily's Facebook page, captioned, "When Money Becomes the Only Goal." The video was barely 2 minutes long, a clumsy mashup of old family gatherings, clips where I said nothing or looked uncomfortable. One segment showed me walking out of the room while Emily cried, though in reality I had gone to get medication for Grandma. But the clip had been edited carefully to paint me as distant, cold, someone who only returned when money was at stake. The post drew hundreds of comments within hours. One account at Lorna78, an old friend of my mother, wrote, "Knew it. The one living in the big city always changes. He comes back to fight over inheritance? No sympathy at all." Another wrote, "Poor Emily. She's the one who stayed, who cared for grandma. And this doctor shows up only when she smells money." I read every line. My chest tightened, not out of anger but because I realized the power of distorted words. Being so badly misunderstood was suffocating. I called Sarah. She answered briefly, "I've seen it. They've launched a PR campaign. You cannot react emotionally. We need to move with precision." 3 days later, the local paper, the Timber Falls Weekly, ran a half-page story with the headline, "The Daughter Returns, Truth or Tactic?" The article featured a photo of me at a funeral, pulled from social media. It also quoted an anonymous source, clearly someone close to Emily, saying I always chose career over family. The town started whispering. One morning at the grocery store, the older cashier leaned in and said quietly, "Hope you're doing okay. Sometimes it's better to handle these things quietly." I smiled and thanked her, but inside I was tangled up in knots. Every night I received dozens of anonymous messages. Some cursed me. Some mocked. Some asked, "Did you know your grandma didn't want you back?" I didn't reply. I just saved everything, each message, each screenshot. Sarah emailed me, "This is the fire test. Don't let them make you question your truth. We're on the right path." I replayed Grandma's voicemail. Her voice, faint but steady like a rock in a storm, "Know that I never meant to leave you behind." That night I sat in my temporary rental in town, opened my laptop and wrote, line by line like bleeding onto the screen. Not to post publicly. Just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, wasn't selfish, wasn't alone. I remembered every time I showed up when Emily vanished. I remembered the night I drove through the rain to bring Grandma her medication. I remembered the look in Grandma's eyes when I lifted her off the bathroom floor, how she gripped my hand and whispered, "With you here, I'm not afraid of anything." I didn't need anyone to defend me. But I would not let them erase the truth. Not again. The next morning, I sent Sarah a summary of the online responses and a copy of all the harassing comments. She replied within an hour. "Good. We'll respond legally, not emotionally. But if they continue, I'll request a court order barring the release of misleading information during the case." I nodded, feeling something rise in me that wasn't anger. It was clarity. A quiet kind of courage that only comes after being misunderstood to the core, and standing anyway. I wasn't waiting to be understood anymore. I was writing the truth myself, with steadiness, not rage. And I knew the real storm hadn't hit yet. But I had something I never had before, the belief that I didn't need anyone's permission to stand for what's right. I've never been someone who seeks noise. My whole life I chose silence as shelter. But at some point even silence becomes complicit if you use it to avoid the truth. That night I sat alone at my desk, warm lamplight falling across a half-finished page. I had rewritten the opening line more than 10 times. Sometimes it sounded like I was talking to a courtroom. Other times like I was trying to defend myself. But no matter how I phrased it, something was missing. The heart. I closed the notebook and looked up at the picture frame of Grandma near the window. She was wearing a purple wool dress, holding a teacup, eyes squinting as she smiled into the sunlight. That was her 80th birthday. The last time I heard her laugh out loud like that. I whispered to myself, I don't need pity. I just want people to know. Grandma didn't leave in silence. 3 days later, I rented a small room in the town library, the place where I used to study in high school. I sent out a simple email invite and posted a notice in the Timber Falls community group. No inflammatory language. Just, I, Gabriella Baker, will share the truth about the final days of my grandmother, Eleanor Baker. All information, evidence, and testimony will be presented publicly. If you've ever wondered, heard rumors, or questioned, please come. Not to take sides, but to know. I didn't expect many to show. This town was used to, everybody knows, nobody says. I was ready to speak even if just one person came. But when I stepped into the hall that Saturday afternoon, I froze. Nearly 40 people were there. The 2 long rows of chairs were filled and a few stood along the walls. I spotted Mr. Jenkins, my old high school teacher, chatting with his wife. Across the room was Ms. Sarah, the florist from whom I once bought Grandma her first bouquet of roses. And at the very back stood Mr. Blake Mason, the elder lawyer with those deep, knowing eyes, arms crossed, silently watching. I stepped up to the wooden podium and took a deep breath. My heart wasn't pounding from nerves. It was pounding because I knew there was no turning back from this moment. I won't speak long. I just ask that you listen to everything, and then decide for yourselves what's right. I turned on the projector and played short clips one by one. First came the bank statements. Months and months of transfers I made to cover property taxes, roof repairs, plumbing, even hospital bills when Grandma had no insurance. I said nothing as the slides played. I let the numbers speak. Next was the audio recording of Marissa, the part-time nurse, recounting the night Grandma fell down the stairs. Her voice was calm but firm, each word slicing through the false narratives. When she described, they stood there watching her for nearly 15 seconds before calling for help. I heard sharp intakes of breath across the room. I paused and looked around. I'm not saying my mother and cousin pushed my grandmother. But I want everyone to know, my grandmother didn't fall alone. And after that she was pressured into changing her will. I opened her handwritten letter, projected it on the screen, letting everyone read each trembling line she wrote. If you're reading this, it means things have gone beyond my control. The entire room fell silent. An elderly woman in the front row wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. I grabbed my phone and played the voicemail, her voice weak but resolute. Know that I never meant to leave you. When the recording ended, I stayed quiet, saying nothing more. I just looked at every face, every pair of eyes, and saw clearly, no one still held the doubts they had at the start. I bowed my head in thanks, stepped down from the podium, and was surprised when the whole room stood up, applauding. Not loud applause, but soft, steady claps, like a silent comfort without words. After the sharing, I received many handshakes. Some sent thank you letters. Some posted on social media saying, I used to believe only one side. Now I understand. But the biggest surprise happened the next day. While washing dishes in my small apartment, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello. I answered. Gabriella. A low male voice spoke softly. I'm Mr. Harris, the neighbor next to Eleanor's house. I remembered him, the widower who lived alone with his gray Labrador. I have something to give you. I wonder, can you come by this afternoon? I can come. What's going on, Mr. Harris? He hesitated a bit. It's footage from my home security camera. I think you should see it. I arrived at his house just as the sun began to cast long shadows. He invited me into the living room and turned on his computer screen. My camera records the front of Eleanor's house. It's not clear inside, but I noticed something unusual that day, so I saved a copy. He clicked the video dated February 17th. The screen showed the front porch of my grandmother's house around 4 p.m. Emily walked out looking annoyed, phone to her ear. My mother appeared right behind, slamming the door hard enough to shake the frame. Then the sound became clear. You don't understand what enough means, my mother shouted. Always defending that girl. She's never really been here, just good at sending money and thinking that's enough. Emily responded, if she wants to play the angel, let her. But you have to worry about what matters. This house belongs to me. Harris paused the video. I was speechless. I don't mean to interfere in other people's business, he said softly, but that day I saw the ambulance arrive later than usual. And in Eleanor's eyes the days after. I knew something had happened. I nodded, eyes stinging. Thank you. This video is the missing piece. Harris placed a warm hand on my shoulder. Your grandmother was proud of you. I'm sure of that. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to keep doing what's right. I left his house, the afternoon wind gently blowing dust across the street. I didn't feel relief. But I saw more clearly than ever that truth can be hidden for a while. But when the time comes, it finds a way to step into the light, through a letter, a testimony, a camera that seemed insignificant. And then those who believed lies could cover a lifetime will face their greatest fear. A woman no longer afraid to be silent. I received the first news on a Monday morning, standing by the window in my small third-floor apartment, holding a cup of milk coffee I hadn't yet sipped. A message from an old high school friend now working at the county tax office. Just the way Timber Falls delivers news. Never direct, only hints. Gabby. The house next to 218 seems to have a foreclosure notice posted. Your cousin can't pay the taxes. I stood frozen for a long time after that message. Not surprised. Not happy either. Just a chill down my spine, like something inside me had collapsed once before and now was collapsing again, but this time in someone else's hands. I didn't respond. I opened my email, focused on unfinished work reports, trying to keep my mind elsewhere, away from that mossy-roofed house. But by noon I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other side was hoarse, familiar enough to make my chest tighten. Gabriella, it's Mom. I was silent. Not out of anger, I wasn't angry anymore, but because I didn't know what to call that woman in my mind anymore. We need to talk, okay? She continued, voice trembling. I don't know where to start. But if you allow me. I took a deep breath. What do you need? I asked directly, no beating around the bush. I was too used to calls that only came when they were desperate. There was a pause on the other end. Then a very soft sigh. The property taxes are overdue, she admitted. Emily can't manage. Her lawyer dropped the appeal. And I'm having trouble with health insurance. They're investigating. I have no one left to ask. I looked out the window where the late winter sun filtered through bare branches, sparkling on the remaining snow. You have Emily, I said slowly. A whole house you chose to leave to her. A will signed and sealed. You don't need me. Don't say that, she choked. I know I was wrong. But, can you forgive me? Even once. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to say anything while my heart was still trembling with an unnamed feeling. Finally I said slowly, forgiveness is possible. But I'm done saving. There was silence on the other end. Then I continued evenly and low. I once paid $80,000 to keep that house from foreclosure. I stayed up all night caring for Grandma. I swallowed tears when I saw my name missing from the will. I believed if I was good long enough, they'd see. But now I understand, some people will only ever take. And when the giver stops, they call it selfishness. My mother cried. Not sobbing, not dramatic, but the cry of an old person, choking and hoarse as if bitterness had crystallized into a heavy lump in her throat. You're right, she whispered. I was too wrong. I thought, if I stayed silent, things would pass. I never thought it would come to this. I don't blame you anymore, I said. Really. I'm not angry. But you have to understand, if today I reach out again to save, tomorrow everything will go back to the way it was. And all I've tried to overcome will be meaningless. I know, she said softly. I don't know how to turn back. I was silent. Then softened, no longer sharp. Start by taking responsibility. By letting Emily face the consequences of her choices. By not calling me every time there's trouble, then turning your back when things settle. If you want to turn back, then don't look for me as a spare tire. Can you come once? She asked like a plea. I hesitated. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I was afraid I'd soften again. Let me think about it, I replied. Not to decide whether to help or not, but to see if I have the strength to face that house without feeling deceived again. She said nothing more. I heard the phone set down, a long sigh, then the call ended. I sat still for a long time, not touching the cold tea. In my mind was the image of a house once full of laughter, where I had believed love was a given. But now it was just a decaying wooden frame and I was no longer the one holding it up. 2 days later, Emily showed up at my apartment door. No warning. No appointment. She wore an old hoodie, a knit cap, and looked so gaunt I almost didn't recognize her. I'm not here to ask for money, she said the moment I opened the door. Good, I answered. Because I'm not giving any more. She took a deep breath and then handed me a stack of papers. These are from the tax office. They're sending a final warning. If payment isn't made within 10 days, they will auction the house. I crossed my arms. And what do you think I'm going to do with that information? Nothing, Emily answered, surprisingly honest. I just don't know who else to talk to. I looked at her a long time. For the first time in my life, I saw no arrogance in Emily's eyes, no pretty mask. Just a lost girl standing at the edge of a chasm she dug herself. I used to think, she whispered, that just having my name on the will would fix everything. That having the house and the title would make me a real adult. But I don't know where to start. I don't know how to manage anything. And now I don't know how to keep it. I didn't answer. I turned inside, pulled an old paper from the drawer. A list of maintenance companies, repairmen, tax phone numbers, property managers I had recorded years ago to help Grandma. I handed it to her. If you want to learn, start here. I won't clean up after you anymore. But I won't stop you either. I'll see if you're mature enough to stand on your own. Emily took the paper, hands trembling. You don't hate me? I shook my head. Hate is easy. But I don't live by hate. I just choose to keep my heart clean. She lowered her head. Thank you for not making me feel worse. I said nothing. I closed the door gently, like putting a period on an old chapter. My heart wasn't light but no longer heavy. Because I knew this time I was true to myself. No saving. No contempt. Just letting people learn to live with their choices. I left Timber Falls on a spring morning, the last patches of snow melting on the roofs under gentle sunlight. The car was packed with boxes and suitcases, but inside me was a rare quiet. No regret, no sadness, just the feeling of someone who had finally done what needed to be done and now had the courage to move on. Seattle welcomed me with the scent of rain mixed with ocean breeze and a strange yet comforting atmosphere. I rented a small apartment near the harbor, where each morning I could hear seagulls, and each night city lights reflected on the water like a gaze from somewhere far away watching over me. In the first months, I spent most of my time working with a group of young doctors at a newly established community health center on the city's south side, serving immigrant families, workers, and elderly people without adequate health care. I didn't just treat illnesses. I sat for hours listening to stories, from an elderly woman who lost her son in war, to an old Mexican man who never learned to read but still biked his wife to heart appointments every week on a rickety bike. Every time I looked at them, I glimpsed my grandmother's figure, a slender woman whose eyes once held all the patience and compassion of the world. And I knew, though she was no longer beside me, I was living on the part she left, not in a will, but in every small act that made others feel seen, cared for, and valued. One weekend afternoon, while updating patient files, I received an email from a downtown gallery. They were organizing a photo exhibit themed Legacy and Memory, showcasing photos preserving personal stories tied to a lost generation. They invited me to participate after seeing a series I posted on my social media, including one of my grandmother sitting by the window, holding a cup of tea, golden sunlight gently highlighting the soft wrinkles on her cheek. I hesitated for 3 nights. That photo was the only one I still kept after everything. It wasn't on my phone, wasn't backed up anywhere, just resting in an old wooden frame beside my bed. But then I remembered her words. If something is truly beautiful, don't keep it to yourself. Let it touch others. I agreed to send the photo. The exhibit opened in early June, in a small red brick building with polished wooden floors and warm yellow lights. I wore a simple white shirt, strolling slowly among black and white photos framed in glass, each one a world of its own. When I stood before my photo, my grandmother as simple as a quiet breath, I heard someone softly behind me say, "That gaze looks like it once loved deeply." I didn't turn around. I just smiled. A few weeks later, I accepted an interview invitation from a local radio station. They wanted to talk about my work at the health center, about photography, and the photo that had captured many hearts at the exhibit. I agreed on the condition that we wouldn't discuss the family dispute. The interview took place in a quiet glass room, with only the sound of the recorder and the host's voice. Margaret, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile. "Gabriella," she began, "you've been through a very special journey. What made you choose this work, instead of continuing your career at a big hospital?" I smiled softly. Because I believe everyone deserves to heal. Not just physically, but the wounds people don't see. You said you left a small town, perhaps carrying many wounds. Do you still keep in touch with your family? I was silent for a moment. I didn't feel pain when I heard that question. I just thought of the answer. "I still carry their last name," I replied slowly, "but I no longer belong to them." The room was quiet for a few seconds. Margaret nodded gently. She didn't ask any more questions. And I knew she understood. That broadcast received a lot of responses. An elderly woman named Lucille sent a handwritten letter to the center. "The way you spoke about healing reminded me of my granddaughter who passed away. She also said you don't need to be loved perfectly, just to be seen." I keep that letter in my desk drawer next to my grandmother's photo frame. And whenever I feel tired, I open it and read. I never returned to Timber Falls again. But once, in a dream, I saw myself standing in the old kitchen, sunlight pouring through the curtains. My grandmother was cooking soup with her back to me, her hair neatly tied, wearing a pale purple sweater. I stepped in and gently touched her shoulder. She turned around and smiled. Her eyes held no blame, no sadness, only one thing: peace. I woke up at 4 a.m., opened the balcony door, and stood under the light drizzle of Seattle. I looked up at the misty sky, feeling lighter than ever before. And I quietly said, not with words but with a breath, I have lived true to your words, not needing to be chosen to become worthy. Perhaps each of us at some point in life has asked ourselves, what truly makes a family? Is it blood, the same last name on a birth certificate? Or is it how people treat each other in the darkest moments? My story may not be like everyone else's. But if somewhere in those fragments of the past you see a part of yourself, a child who tried so hard to be recognized, a child who stayed silent to avoid complicating already tangled relationships, then I want you to know, you are not alone. What do you think of the choices I made? If it were you, would you be willing to let go of a family that no longer sees your value? Please share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you're interested in everyday slices of life, real emotional stories about family, love, betrayal, and the journey to find yourself, don't forget to subscribe. Because here we don't just tell stories, we connect through the most honest truths.